Greetings, stalwart stewards of our endangered Earth and protectors of our planetary boundaries, and welcome, class, to the first session of Climate Uncertainty, Mitigation, and Adaptation at the Patel College of Global Sustainability. I'm your host, Dr. T.H. Culhane, and I will be your captain as we sail this vessel of discovery and exploration into the unknown and dangerously uncertain future confronting Homo sapiens, that's us, in the first quarter of the 21st century. Our goal is to get to the 22nd century alive and well, and to do that, we need to take action. Kids are being asked in schools around the world, what do you want to be when you grow up? And the most poignant answer seems to be simply, alive. This is no hyperbole for most of the children born into this world of what Hunter Lavins famously called global weirding. Climate change has already had a tremendous negative effect on millions of people, and we're seeing more and more climate refugees and climate change-rooted wars and conflicts around the world. And it could get much, much worse. As oceanographer and sea level historian John Englander points out, quote, "The graph here shows 4 major ice ages on a cycle of roughly 100,000 years. The last ice age peak was just over 20,000 years ago. At that time, sea level was almost 400 feet or 120 meters below the present due to the huge quantity of water locked up in the ice sheets more than a mile deep over North America and Europe. The other very interesting sea level event was approximately 120,000 years ago during the previous interglacial, the warm period between ice ages like our present era. In that last interglacial, known as the Eemian to geologists, the temperature was a few degrees warmer than at present, but sea level rose about 26 feet or 8 meters higher than present, possibly even a little higher. With our present warming trend, that higher sea level is a major concern due to the catastrophe that it would present to coastal cities and infrastructure globally. Because our warming is now happening a lot faster than previous periods of natural abrupt climate change, there is no way to accurately predict how many years it will take for enough ice to melt to raise the ocean that much." He goes on, quote, "The real big issue of concern is, of course, the level of CO2. As shown on the green line in the middle, it has fluctuated between about 180 to 280 parts per million over this period of time. It very closely moves with temperature. Now the level has shot up like a rocket to 400 parts per million, a 40% increase. This correlates with our burning of fossil fuels, reduction of forest cover, and other factors. The concern to our children's children is even more dire as we continue the climb, which will most assuredly happen as population continues to climb, and with it fossil fuel use and the degradation of our carbon-capturing oceans and forests and wetlands." Englander says, quote, "The last time that CO2 levels were in the range near 1,000 was about 55 million years ago. At that time, there were no polar ice sheets, and sea level was approximately 250 feet or 75 meters higher than today." And this is to say nothing of the almost certain release of all the methane now trapped beneath the ice and in the ocean floors as methane hydrates begin to release their gases. You think it's not happening? Check out these animations of the data over the past few decades. Wow. The irony is that all of this data shows us that climate change effects are not something that just started affecting us. It's been measurable since the 1880s. Let's look at this graph in text from climate.gov. Though warming has not been uniform across the planet, the upward trend in the globally average temperature shows that more areas are warming than cooling. See, since 1880, surface temperature has risen at about an average pace of 0.13 Fahrenheit or 0.07 degrees centigrade every 10 years for a net warming of 1.69 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.94 degrees Celsius, that's almost 1 degree C, through 2016. Over this 137-year period, average temperatures over land areas has warmed faster than ocean temperatures, 0.18 degrees Fahrenheit or 0.10 degrees Celsius per decade compared to 0.11 Fahrenheit, 0.06 Celsius per decade. The last year with a temperature cooler than the 20th century average was 1976. Now, the reason that you and many other Americans are only just hearing about this, and why many have the luxury of still debating with the unscientific idea that it might be a hoax, is because most of us who are in the middle to upper class have the privilege, often the stolen privilege, of living in what were the most geologically and environmentally stable and productive and economically prosperous regions of the world, insulated from the direst effects of climate change. It was generally the poor and marginalized and economically and politically vulnerable people whose families were at risk from the mounting climate uncertainties, and they're the ones who've done the dying and suffering from droughts, floods, famines, diseases, earthquakes, freezings, and fires and hurricanes. We've been lulled into a false sense of security by the buffering that disproportionate wealth and opportunity gave us. And up until recently, very few dared to attribute the fate of those people, the underprivileged working classes and subsistence farmers of the world, to the effects of our industrial pollutant-laden society on the climate. Until quite recently, we still talked about natural disasters and acts of God. Only recently are we realizing that the entire narrative in our historical memory has taken place in the midst of climate changes that began with the agricultural revolution and its attendant deforestation, and then of course the discovery and use of fossil fuels, which really accelerated it. There hasn't been a time in recorded history when we humans and our activities weren't increasingly implicated in dramatic changes in the landscape and the climate. If we go back to the American Revolution and its aftermath, we find that our founding fathers were actually actively talking about anthropogenic climate change, saying that they wanted to change the climate, that they wanted in fact to deforest as much of the continent as possible, in the hopes that they could raise the temperature and make a more mild and stable climate. The results, however, did not turn out to their satisfaction. For though they did indeed change the climate, they changed it in ways that often made their lives harder, i.e. more uncertain and more extreme. And things have been getting more difficult ever since, because while we call climate change global warming to reflect the overall trend for the planetary average, it's really, as we said, climate weirding, or as we also like to call it, climate uncertainty, something that makes it harder and harder to rely on the predictions of the old Farmer's Almanac. And that's why, to finish this introduction, it's very sad to see that most Americans don't get this, that they fall prey to the flawed logic in false news articles like this one with the title, "Al Gore Blames Record U.S. Cold on Climate Change," then meteorologist drops truth bomb on him. The supposed truth bomb is Bastardi's claim, Bastardi, the supposed meteorologist, which, quote, is challenging whether the recent cold has anything to do with climate change, saying cold in the 1980s was colder than this year's recent cold snap, and it was never connected to climate change or global warming. Well, this begs the question, who never connected the 1980s cold snaps to climate change? Was it the poorly educated American voters? Was it the political pundits? Was it the lobbyists? Was it people who stand to gain from these kind of uncertainties? Scientists since Svante Arrhenius have been saying since the 1880s that climate changes were occurring and causing problems that would get progressively weirder, progressively worse if we didn't act responsibly. In this sense, the climate skeptics and deniers are right. Climate change is nothing new. But what's old about climate change, and in particular climate uncertainty, is that it hurts a lot of people, and has hurt a lot of people, and it will hurt even more if we don't act now. And that's what we should all be focusing on. Now in this class, we're all about the things you can do, the things we can do to adapt to and mitigate a very real climate change that we here at Patel take very seriously. Welcome aboard.